Faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, we're interpreting the book How to Make Correct Decisions for You. Decision making isn't new to us, from big choices like careers to small ones like routes. It's everywhere, shaping our lives and even our futures. Although everyone wants to make good decisions, sadly, things don't always go our way. Today's book is called How to Make Correct Decisions. The author, Gary Klein, is a top decision expert for the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. military, and the American Psychological Association. Plus, he's been invited multiple times by big global firms like McKinsey and IBM to help with critical decisions. In the book, Gary Klein introduces a decision method different from traditional ones called the Recognition Primed Decision Model, or RPD model for short. The author believes that in real-world situations, experience helps people make efficient decisions. So, why does he hold this view? Next, we'll follow the author's train of thought to outline the book's key points. First, let's discuss what the RPD decision model is and why it helps us make efficient decisions. The RPD decision model is a method that uses experience for decision making, involving two cognitive processes. The first is the decision maker assessing the current situation and identifying reasonable action plans. The second is using mental simulation to evaluate those action plans. Here, some concepts come into play and need explaining. The first process is situation recognition. Simply put, it's about sizing up what's happening. Think about past similar events. If none, go with how you've handled such things before. The key to situation recognition is figuring out what type of situation you're dealing with. For example, if you're unsure how thick to dress in the morning, you might check the weather forecast, actual temperature, or what others are wearing. And these references are the clues for decision making. Judging the weather identifies the situation type, and deciding what to wear is the outcome. Sometimes situations are complex with too little info or constant change. Mid-change, if the decision maker can't quickly figure out the situation type, it affects the outcome. Generally, the more experienced the decision maker, the easier it is to recognize the situation through this process. What type does it belong to? Then the decision maker builds an action plan and moves to the second process, evaluating it through mental simulation. What does that mean? First, let's talk about mental simulation. It's the ability to imagine how things happen, develop, and end. People who've played paper maze games might have this experience. Before filling in the correct path, they mentally navigated to avoid messing up the paper. That's a form of mental simulation. Decision makers use this to mentally simulate the action plan's implementation, predict difficulties, and assess feasibility, reducing failure chances. For example, famous American high jumper Stones constantly imagines clearing the bar before each attempt, adjusting for mistakes in his mind. Only then does he actually jump. Note that in this process, the decision maker evaluates only one action plan at a time. If difficulties arise, the decision maker adjusts the plan and chooses another path. To summarize, the conceptual PD model uses an if-then logic to aid decision making. The single quotation mark, logic to aid decision making. If the situation is simple, then act directly based on its solution. If the situation is complex, then carefully deliberate on its essence before acting. If the situation and action plan are clear, then rehearse the plan, handle potential problems cautiously, and correct promptly. Sounds simple, right? Why does Gary Klein think this method leads to efficient decisions? To answer that, we must first discuss the prerequisites for using the RPD model. That is, in naturalistic settings, which contrast with laboratory settings where subjects are artificially set up to study decision making. Due to artificial factors, lab-based decision models often have limited applicability. Naturalistic settings study real-life situations in daily work and life, as people often joke that reality is harsher than TV dramas. Look at the characteristics of naturalistic settings and you'll understand. Missing information, limited time, high risks, unclear goals, and changing conditions. These are hard to replicate in lab settings. For instance, a fire commander's decision-making scenario is classic naturalistic. Fires cause major property and life losses rapidly. So when making decisions at a fire scene, commanders face several challenges. Extreme time pressure requiring quick judgment. High risks, not just to victims and property, but even the commander's own safety is threatened. Unpredictable variables. Nobody can accurately foresee what'll happen next. Fire conditions change constantly, forcing new decisions based on real-time situations. Third, unclear objectives. They must determine the primary goal. Extinguish flames first, search for survivors, or let it burn out to minimize losses. Unclear goals lead to ambiguous rescue procedures, further complicating decisions. Though most people rarely face such high-risk decisions, daily choices like driving routes or chess moves often share naturalistic features. People habitually use traditional rational analysis, list options, compare pros and cons, finally pick the highest scoring option. But each step consumes significant time and requires abundant information. The problem, you need time to gather that info. Without time or sufficient data, blindly using rational analysis often leads to bad decisions. The RPD model's strength? Solving problems efficiently without wasting time on comparisons. Specifically, during situation recognition, decision makers skip comparing options, just identify if it matches a known type. Like when a building's on fire, if flames spread vertically, the commander immediately deploys overhead water, the most effective solution for vertical fires. In this example, the fire commander directly applied the corresponding approach based on the fire's characteristics, um, without wasting time comparing which firefighting method was best. During the action plan evaluation phase, if one doesn't work, then they think about the next. This is called the singular evaluation method. When using this, decision makers consider multiple possibilities, but evaluate only one option at a time. For instance, if you're driving on an unfamiliar street and suddenly run out of gas, you'd choose the first gas station you find, not compare every station to pick the best. This singular evaluation comes from Herbert Simon, a Nobel economics laureate, who discovered people choose the first feasible option that comes to mind. It's this decisiveness that makes the RPD model more efficient in naturalistic settings. You might question, while efficient, this method's quality isn't necessarily high. So the next question is, how can we actually use the RPD model to make high-quality decisions? It still requires leveraging some innate human abilities to advance the decision process. The author calls these abilities sources of power: intuition, mental simulation, leverage points, insight, analogy, storytelling, and mind reading, 7 forces. Let's explore them one by one. First, intuition. It typically appears in the RPD model's first step, situation recognition. Relying on intuition might sound unbelievable, but oddly, even experienced decision makers firmly believe intuition sometimes truly helps them make correct calls. But why is that? Actually, this relates to intuition's core trait. People recognize things without knowing how they did it. Say you walk the same route daily after work. Over time, you'll accurately avoid obstacles without even noticing, as if guided by intuition. It sounds mystical, but it's deeply ingrained experience. When experience accumulates sufficiently, decision patterns and action plans exist in your mind, triggered by similar situations. This knowledge surfaces automatically. The decision-making process is usually quick, and decision makers often can't pinpoint where their methods come from. So they attribute it to intuition. Intuition helps decision makers leverage experience to quickly clarify the current situation, identify key clues, match them with past experiences, and devise action plans. For decision making novices, it's genuinely hard to develop accurate intuition initially. It requires gradual accumulation. The most effective and fastest way to gain relevant experience is by frequently tackling challenging situations or attending specialized training. Intuition also has its limitations. Using intuition for decisions is like applying a template, and templates are inherently limited, so it's only suitable for simpler decision context. If encountering complex decision scenarios, you need the second power, mental simulation. It's widely applied in decision making. Beyond evaluating action plans, it aids in complex situation recognition. For instance, jurors in court often don't know the true case facts, but construct their own interpretations based on evidence. Their decision favors whichever lawyer's story aligns best with the narrative they've mentally built. Additionally, mental simulation generates expectations, imagining how events unfolded in the past might evolve in the future and what potential outcomes could occur. The benefit is that once reality contradicts expectations, decision makers can detect issues and adjust plans promptly. Mental simulation permeates the RPD model, making it a staple tool for experts. Novices should learn this by thoroughly dissecting plans through mental simulation before execution to uncover as many flaws as possible. And people are often blindly confident in their own plans, and those with less expertise are more error prone. Mental simulation helps expose weaknesses and refine action plans. Intuition and simulation identify problems, but how do we solve them? This is where the third power comes in, leverage points. Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the earth," illustrating the immense power of leverage. A leverage point is essentially a breakthrough spot for solving problems. Through this small change, huge differences can be made. The author gives an example of a doctor saving a baby with blocked airways. Cysts in the baby's throat blocked the airway. One method was inserting a breathing tube through the throat, but cysts covered the mouth, preventing access. Another approach was cutting open the baby's windpipe to open the airway, but this risked infection. Then the doctor thought of pressing the baby's chest. Where bubbles appeared in the baby's saliva indicated the airway entrance. Using this method, they successfully inserted the breathing tube. Here, the doctor using bubbles to find the airway was a leverage point. Finding it means locating the starting point for action. One leverage point yields a fragmented action plan. As more points emerge, the problem clarifies. And connecting these fragmented plans forms a complete action strategy. There are two ways to find leverage points. First, using personal experience. More experience makes identification easier. Second, when clueless, re-examine the situation from different angles to identify new leverage points. If experience is limited, is finding leverage points harder? Not necessarily. For example, in Go matches, teenagers often beat adult masters. This is because finding breakthrough methods, leverage points in Go, requires unconventional ideas beyond just experience. So, less experienced decision makers should value this beginner's mindset, viewing problems differently with sharp insight, the fourth power. Insight manifests as experts noticing details novices miss, detecting anomalies faster. They also see the big picture, seize opportunities, and adapt flexibly. Like expert sommeliers tasting wine can identify grape varieties and even vintages. Mastering such subtle distinctions requires extensive professional accumulation. This seems like a lengthy process. But Gary Klein believes learning isn't about knowledge itself, but how to perceive, how to understand this. When it comes to language learning, why do some people pick up multiple languages easier than others? Is it just higher language talent? Actually, not necessarily. For most people, they often start with vocabulary and grammar to infer meaning, essentially the content of the text. But for those good at language learning, when reading an article, they first grasp the overall meaning, then use context to deduce grammatical structures and word forms, ultimately recognizing words and grammar. This holistic perception approach achieves twice the result with half the effort. In daily life, we also encounter similar situations. For example, when learning to ride a bike, following standard steps often doesn't help you grasp it quickly. Instead, ditching the steps and focusing on the overall momentum while pedaling forward makes learning feel more effective. If you want insight like an expert, learning the knowledge itself is one thing, but more crucially, learn how experts think and understand their strategies for perceiving situations. If we compare an expert's knowledge to an oil field, acquiring it is like mining oil. We not only need to know where the oil field is, but also how it's discovered, extracted, refined, and applied. In knowledge acquisition, this means focusing on how experts gained their expertise, how experts acquired this knowledge, what can be absorbed directly, and what requires firsthand experience. We must adapt experts' knowledge into forms we can absorb, develop new applications, and after accumulating experience, learn to integrate it with real situations. This brings in the fifth power. The role of analogy is to compare the current situation with similar past ones. It's like drawing resources from an experience bank, providing templates for handling similar events, helping us identify typical situations faster. Besides that, analogy also helps set expectations and provide action suggestions. Setting expectations means the ability to predict what might happen in new situations. We often use this in daily life too, like walking outside on a windy day and seeing a billboard on a building. You might recall news reports of similar incidents. On windy days, billboards can blow off and injure pedestrians. To avoid similar tragedies, you choose to steer clear of hazards. This is analogy's predictive function, preventing potential problems and offering action advice. It's easily understood, like a student stuck on homework, checking notes for similar problems solved by the teacher, then using that template to find answers. Analogical reasoning is widely applicable in life. Even decision-making novices can draw comparable elements from limited experience. Note: analogous experiences should align with the current decision scenario in key aspects. Novices often err by misjudging their experience. Using flawed guidance leads to worse outcomes. Both insight and analogy's power stem from experience. The sixth power, storytelling, helps consolidate experience for future reuse. If you ask a decision expert why they always make right calls, they'll likely give vague answers with little practical advice. That ask about their toughest decision or proudest moment, and they'll passionately recount stories with vivid details. This holds experts' most valuable decision-making wisdom, exactly what we seek. Storytelling helps comprehend current events. Through storytelling, experience gradually transforms into expertise. A good story, though complex, lets us intuitively grasp its context by analyzing details, helping apply solutions to similar scenarios. For novices, the hardest part is finding compelling stories packed with expertise, techniques, and judgment clues. When experts share decision experiences from unconventional events, it's a golden learning opportunity for novices. Preparation is needed before experts share stories. For example, list the key aspects you want to focus on, identify where the expert's account differs from your expectations, and pay special attention to their choices at critical junctures. For instance, how would the expert choose if they hadn't discovered that crucial piece of information? If the action plan encounters obstacles, how would they adapt? What mistakes might I make in similar situations? And so on. These probing questions help novices identify weaknesses and re examine information they overlooked, but experts deem critical. Finally, let's discuss the seventh decision making power, mind reading. Mind reading is typically used in team decision communication. Decisions aren't always individual, especially for managers. Making decisions is just the start. Implementation requires others' cooperation. Like a fire commander needing firefighters' coordination, accurately understanding others' intentions becomes vital, as if reading minds. Why is team communication so important? First, it helps team members understand the decision maker's thoughts, align mentally, increase buy in, and master self adjustment to avoid team failure from individual errors. Second, situations change dynamically during execution, and decision makers can't possibly cover all details. Enhanced communication helps executors grasp intentions and improvise flexibly, reducing implementation difficulty. Novices in teams often just execute orders passively. When situations change rapidly and decision makers can't adjust plans in time, novices easily face danger. Thus, before action, novices should strive to understand the decision maker's intent, including goals and alternatives. When unclear about decisions, communicate beforehand to understand situational essence and build adaptability. Now let's review the RPD decision model. Its key strength is avoiding option comparisons, making it ideal for time-constrained, dynamic situations with unclear goals and experienced decision makers. Whereas rational choice strategies suit scenarios needing explicit reasoning or complex calculations. In practice, by harnessing our inner sources of power, like intuition, mental simulation, storytelling, and analogy, we can transform how we perceive events and make sound decisions. Okay, how do we make correct decisions? That wraps up our interpretation of this book. You'll find reading notes below the audio. See you tomorrow.